Hey guys, this is IX with RolloutReviews bringing you another BIONICLE review. This time it's set number 70793, Skull Basher. This set contains 72 pieces and retails for about $15 US. Skull Basher is a towering brute of pure evil. Skull Grinder's dark power courses forcefully through his bones, making him the strongest of the Skull Army's lieutenants. His mighty hook axes will smash even the toughest hero to the ground, and it will require incredible teamwork, strength, and courage to bring down this awesome enemy. It's no coincidence that Skull Basher is chosen to guard the gate to the Temple of Creation. First, we'll go over how he's built, starting with the legs. Basher's got the large style of feet, just like Onua, which offers him a solid base. The shins are made up of black bones, small trans-orange shells, and the new detailed armor piece layered on top as knee pads. From there, the upper legs are just skeletal silver bones. Pretty standard stuff from the waist down, although I do wish they would have added just a little bit more trans-purple in there somewhere. Perhaps instead of the orange. Speaking of which, the ribbed body armor on the torso is a nice chunk of purpley goodness, and I love this shade of translucent plastic. The usual exposed ball joints appear on either side of the chest, of course, and unfortunately I feel like maybe they're even more noticeable this time around, just because of how far back Basher's shoulders sit. Regardless, the printing on the chest plate is nice and symmetrical, and easily the most uniform design in the group. It's complete with bone-decorated armor plating, piston-like shoulder tendons, a vent in the center, and a chain accent linked all the way across the front. From behind, things certainly look different. We'll explore the purpose of the big red button and assortment of Technic beams in a short little while here, but below the assembly, the figure is pretty bare. Up above, however, sit some trans-orange armor shells with solid purple add-ons. And evidently, the website titles these the Doom Spikes, which, and I quote, are powered by pure evil. What? What does that even mean? They're just shoulder armor. Either way, these, along with the orange in the legs, suggest some kind of connection to Skull Grinder, something consistent among all of his minions. As mentioned earlier, the mechanism for the play function sits the arms themselves considerably far back, even farther than the standard gearbox assembly, which makes the upper body look a little disconnected and lacking in some ways. But the action feature sort of requires this space to work properly, so I suppose it couldn't have been easily avoided. That said, the large shoulder pads attached to the trans-purple upper arms do help hide the gaps from certain angles, and especially when tilted forward, although that limits the elbows to an inward swing, among causing other interferences in the mechanism. I also find that from time to time, maneuvering the spiky shoulder pads around the Doom Spikes can lead to things getting caught on each other in ways that you probably want to try and avoid. Like his brethren, the set offers two masks. The first one is a new bull skull mask, which, aside from having such a jarringly blunt name, sports one of the most interesting shapes in all of Bionicle. One of the first things I noticed is how small it feels compared to your average mask. It's thin and spooky, with sunken eye slots and a slender vented jaw. Just like the other new skull mask in the wave, there are subtle mechanical-looking details on both sides, and a mix of shiny and matte textures about its surface. The second is a version of Onua's golden mask, which is meant to represent Basher using it to drain the Master of Earth's elemental power. Now, it might just be my established love for trans-purple Lego, but there's something about this one in particular that I like more than the others. Generally, these siphoned masks haven't done much for me, but not only does this one add a bit more of the translucent color to Basher's palette, but the crossfade effect here actually really changes the tone of the mask. The transition from purple to gold gives it a real sense of corruption, and actually looks pretty nice when being worn. The face and eyes are no different from the other Skull villains, but obviously the head is adorned with massive solid purple bull horns. In my experience, these get in the way of both posing and play constantly. They're just too big. Both are attached to the head through the eye stalk, and initially I expected this to be a problem. I thought they would act as a touchy lever that made it far too easy to pop off the mask. Honestly, that really isn't the case, and if anything, squeezing together the connectors that attach them adds additional friction, which makes the mask more difficult to pop off. But of course, your mileage may vary depending on how recklessly you handle the toy. The horns also mean that only certain masks will actually fit Basher. The Bull Skull and Onua masks go on just fine, but you'll run into some problems with something like, say, the Mask of Fire. Not that it would make much sense for him to be wearing that, but too bad! He can't anyway! On a side note, overall I think the color choices on this guy are a little weird, what with having two different kinds of purple. It seems to me like the purple Doom spikes are only there to support the also solidly colored horns. But I just don't understand why the horns aren't trans purple to begin with. I also think this would have been a great opportunity to introduce trans purple CCBS shells into the system. I know the real answer to all of this is probably budget constraints, but I just want more trans purple, man. I've got a hunger that needs to be tamed! Oh well. Moving on, Skull Basher wields two formidable hook axes. These feature a new large blade piece, which makes up the majority of the weapons. It's aesthetically very similar to the hook blades we saw in both Warrior and Slicer, and much the same, it's meant to slide behind Atoa's mask and rip it off in actually a couple of different ways. There's also a clever indent behind the sharp edge that helps catch a mask in the gap and hold it in place. This works especially well for Onua's because of the brow on the mask, which fits right into that notch, and this is my favorite way to display Basher with the stolen Mask of Earth. Because of the softer plastic these tools are made out of, the layered design is engineered to bend, collapse, and spring back. Now, that doesn't serve much of a purpose for this set, but the design comes into full effect with Skull Grinder, and of course we'll discover that further in a separate review. Now finally, the play feature. If nothing else, it's much more original than your standard gear function. By pressing the big red button on the back, the arms will swing forward simultaneously and, well, bash together. There's also a silver-ribbed tube internally that sort of acts like a spring, and it tries its best to reset the function. The gimmick is also designed with some loosey-goosey leeway rooms that it allows you to tilt the mechanism left and right, to swing the arms from side to side, or launch them forward individually. All of this is great conceptually, and it's definitely a refreshing change of pace. I know that a lot of people are going to love this function, and I expected myself to be one of them. But unfortunately, there are just too many things that I dislike about the way this works in hand. First, it's just not solid enough for me. When tilting or swinging the set left and right, the shoulders just sort of flap around. I understand that maybe this is meant to be part of the gimmick rather than a flaw, but I just don't like the arms constantly shifting whenever I pick it up or bump them the wrong way. Second, the axes themselves are just too heavy in relation to the wrist joints. I find that when playing with the function, the force of the swing causes the axes to sort of tilt inward on their own. Lastly, I'm just annoyed by how constantly prone things are to crash into each other. Between the horns, knee pads, and axes, you have to pose everything in such a way just to try avoiding interference in the first place. But even then, once some of the joints give out, things still manage to interfere anyway. Unless you're excessively slow and careful, there's just no winning. It seems like one way or another, things are going to clash and collide, and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't like that. On paper, Skullbasher is a tough-looking purple Minotaur skeleton man with big old axes and his very own unique play feature. In practice, however, I find the set really disappointing. I think between both this guy and Skull Slicer, I've learned a thing or two about how expectations can make or break a figure for me. I initially wasn't too wowed by Slicer and ended up pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Similarly, at first I was really looking forward to Basher, and ultimately I just don't think it lives up to the hype. It's definitely not a bad set, and as I understand, I'm in the minority here. Most people consider Basher to be one of the best in the wave, but personally, I'm just not a big fan. For the record, he also just sucks as a Temple Guardian, so there's that too. Anyway, that is about it, guys, and this is IX Roll It IX, signing off.